Hello, welcome to the Elevate Dataviz Show, number 20. Woo! We're here to explore current topics in data visualization, share our creative inspiration, and the tools and techniques that we're experimenting with as practicing information designers. Today, we are talking about being more creative in data visualization and how you bring a book from idea to publication. I'm Ali Torben. We have Duncan Keir, Gabrielle Marit, and Will Chase. Before we jump in, this show is supported by the members of the Elevate Dataviz learning community who get the opportunity to watch and ask questions live. So if you would like to do that and you want to level up your Dataviz skills in a very supportive community, check out elevatedataviz.com.
Yeah. So we were a bit kind of like weirdly torn on the subject for today because I really wanted to do something about Ali's new book, which Will was waving around a second ago as well. But then we were like, is it weird that, this is Ali's book and she's like on is this going to be like a weird promotional thing? I don't think so, because it's actually
commercial.
It's like genuinely some really, really interesting ideas in there. But also I thought it would be super interesting to explore how you get a book published, like because I'm sure there's tons of people out there who are thinking, I've got this really cool idea for a book, but I've no idea what to do with that idea. So yeah, I wanted to sort of like talk a little bit about the book, but honestly a lot about how to make a book, how to create a book in the world.
Yeah, I wrote down the process to make sure I got all the things, so I'm ready.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So we're going to grill you about that. But first, do you want to just tell us just a very quick, for people who've never heard of this book before, what is it, what it's about, why is it?
Why? Why do it? ChartSpark, harness your creativity in data communication to stand out and innovate. I went on my own kind of creative journey. I started out as a math major and then I was a data analyst, and I always just felt like, I don't know, something was missing. And I also kind of felt like not as valued at my jobs because it was very tool centric. Like, okay, learn how to use the software. Now you just do it. And I just didn't feel very valued. I didn't feel very fulfilled. So I was like, okay, there's something missing here. So along with my journey to learn data visualization, I found that there's this other thing called creativity where you're thinking of new ideas that go hand in hand really well. So I, through my interviews and doing my own experimentation, kind of developed a creative practice and a series of prompts that I use when I'm trying to pull out my own creativity. Like, this would be really useful for other people because I've kept talking to other people, other data analysts, data-oriented people who were feeling the same thing. It's like, well, what do I do? Like you hear the advice like, go take a walk or go sketch or be more curious about the world. And you're just like, okay, how do I connect the dots?
Just go and be more curious.
Yes, or go, yeah, just relax. So like, okay, that's really useful.
Be more creative.
Yes, think outside the box. You got this. So it's just like, okay, there's like all these little tips and whatever. How do you actually connect the dots to be like, okay, what should I actually do every day to be more creative when I'm actually sitting down to work on a project? What do I actually do? So put that in a book.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. And you were talking about interviews a second ago. That was interviews for your podcast, right?
Yes. Dataviz Today did a lot of podcast interviews. And, I've been interviewing people since 2018. So that's 6 years. I keep doing the math wrong because I keep forgetting it's 2024. But yeah, 6 years of interviews.
That must have included a bunch of people who had written their own books, right? And wanted to talk about them. So how much of that was an influence on you thinking, I want to make my own book?
Oh, like because I interviewed other people making a book, it made me want to make my own book?
I suppose so, yeah.
Yeah, how did you come up with the idea of even writing a book? Could have been a newsletter.
Yeah, I mean, and also like, why a book rather than another podcast series or articles on the Elevate blog or some other format?
Yeah, I felt like, I guess I can't trace back to the exact moment where it was like, this must be a book, but it did feel like maybe this is a antiquated notion, but it just feels like having a book feels like almost like a piece of art. Like you have to put so much time and effort into just crafting this one thing where it feels more like an accomplishment. anybody can write a blog post, anybody can write, record a podcast, and those are all great things. But it just felt like crystallizing everything into a book was going to be more impactful for myself and others if it was in a book. I think
Okay.
that's where that came from. And then I had I guess this was summer of 2023, I guess it was. I got matched up with Steve Wexler as my mentor through the Data Visualization Society mentorship program. And I wanted somebody who ran their own business and had written a book before. So he was a wonderful mentor and walked me through like the proposal process and everything. And I wanted to just self-publish the book actually. And he was like, well, if you're going to make a book, then actually go through the process of making a proposal because it will help you clarify your thinking. And then why not just shop it around to some publishers and kind of just see what happens? You just never know. So
hang on.
it kind of got bigger.
Come back. Yeah, I want to come back to
Mhm.
this kind of self-publishing publisher
Mhm.
thing. But before we talk about that, I just wanted to sort of ask, I guess, a bit more like, you sort of hinted at this a minute ago, but had you always wanted to write a book, or is this something that, just appeared to you one day and as a kind of like inkling of an idea?
Yeah, no, I
Because
guess
there are people who are like, yeah, I've always wanted to do a book kind of thing.
I think I had, when I did start the podcast and I was doing a lot of interviews early on, I did think, this probably could become a book at some point, but I never knew what about. And I remember a publisher approaching me probably in 2019, probably like, hey, would you be interested in writing a book? I was like, yeah, maybe eventually, but I have no clue what it would be about. So I guess that seed was always back there. Like I probably am collecting a lot of things that would be really useful in a book, but I just didn't know what the angle would be yet.
And it was doing your podcast interviews that sort of crystallized that for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it slowly became clear as I was going through my own journey, and then like doing the Elevate community, talking to people, like the things they were asking me for. It just kind of started. I started figuring out like what would be the most useful for people that I could deliver.
And how did you cross that line from, thinking, oh, this, could be a book someday, to actually starting to write a book?
I think it was the mentorship with Steve Wexler, because he was just like, what are you going to show me next week? If this is what you want to do, then
so it was
what are you
kind
going
of
to show me?
an external commitment.
Yeah. I think if you know that about yourself, and I know that about myself, like I will easily break promises to myself, but I do not want to break promises to other people, which sounds very unhealthy, but but knowing he was going to be asking me about it next week, I was like, okay, well, I better do something. I better push this rock up the hill a little bit.
I mean, I think that's really good to have an external source for a book in particular, because like you said, it's not easy to write a book. And so like, everyone I think that's written a book will be like, don't write a book
by yourself.
Or
by yourself.
Do, but like think hard about it.
It is a lot of work.
It's not a thing you should take lightly. So I guess on that note, I'm also curious about maybe like an overall, we can probably get into more of the specifics, but I'm curious just like an overall perspective now having finished it. What was your, advice to somebody that's thinking of writing a book in terms of just the process? Like,
definitely commit. Like think, is this important to you? Is this so important to you that you're willing to dedicate a significant portion of your time and mental space for at least a year? Because
like years, right?
Well, years, but at least a year. I think that kind of at least will change your perspective. Because when I met with Steve Wexler, I was like, I want to self-publish a book and I want to finish it this summer. Like I want to spend 3 months on it and be good. And he didn't laugh in my face, but he was basically like, okay, well. So at least like if you're thinking that, like I thought it's not going to be like that unless you want to. People do those quick ebooks, that are like 50 pages, 75 pages, and you just like push it out, and it's basically like a bunch of blog posts stitched together. I feel like the hard part is making sure that it's like a really cohesive thing that people have some sort of journey through. You know, you can stitch together a whole bunch of blog posts, but you have to make sure that people have some sort of transformation at the end. And then it's like it's like holding their hand through every stage of the thing. So I have the care section, like how do you care for your creativity? How do you coax things out? And then how do you communicate your creative ideas? So it's like a journey that you have to bring somebody through. So if you really want to do it, that takes a lot of time. Like you're going to have to, one, figure out what you're going to put in it. And then you have to figure out you have to write it. And you also have to like figure out how it's all going to flow together, and everything's going to have to work together. So I think, yeah, make sure you're going to commit to it for at least a year. This is something that's going to take a really long time, and it's painful.
Especially if you've never written a book before, right? Like you said, there's people that can take, sort of a few months and put together a quick ebook or whatever. But
I think you would have had to already have a lot of content by then, I think. And yeah, you would have had to have written a lot.
Probably experience writing a book, knowing just the process, the things you have to go through.
Yeah, I think I would be faster this time, but if I did another one. But yeah, you're right. If you've never done it before, it takes a long time.
Well, how did you take? I mean, you mentioned basically you have all this information, you have to collect it. Now you have to actually make a book. It has to be a story. It has to have a transformation. It has to have structure to it. So what was your process? How did you take all that pile of information you had and make the structure?
Yeah, I think at first I collected the different things that I thought were really useful. So like in my book proposal, I had a couple things that I knew that I wanted to include, like my chapter on visual metaphor that I created a blog post about in the Dataviz community, which basically I copied and pasted into the book proposal, because it's like I had already thought about that a lot. I had already given talks about it. So kind of gathering big ideas that I had already had like on the podcast, things I'd been giving talks about, gathering all that stuff, and then seeing how it fits together. Like, is there some sort of flow? Is there like different categories? That was kind of the biggest thing at the beginning, is figuring out like how this stuff fits. How am I going to just lay this stuff out? So I think I got the care section and the coax section first. Like, okay, you do need to have like some ways to gather inspiration and to make sure you're resting and all that stuff. That's kind of like care. And then the prompts and stuff to pull ideas out. That's more like coaxing it out. And then talking about this to a lot of other people. Someone actually told me outline of the of the book proposal, or I did a table of contents and just trying to organize what would go where. And someone was like, "Oh, this actually looks like maybe you would have 3 parts and break up some of the chapters," because I just had 2 parts at once. And then that, oh, okay, that's a 3rd part that would communicate. So yeah, I think first gathering all the things that you have, try to do like a high level outline, table of contents kind of thing, like how would this all fit together, and then start aerating the idea a little bit, and people will tell you like, oh, this part really interests me, or maybe the sequence doesn't make sense. So yeah, I think that's what I would do.
Should we talk about what's in the book a little bit? Just because I also feel like part of the process is related to the content. Like, do you want to give us a quick like summary of what's in it?
Yeah. So like I said, 3 sections. So the first one is called care, and it's talking about like expanding your mental boundaries, like being really open to ideas and specific ways that you can actually do that. Cultivating your inspiration, and then building your habits. So that's the care section. And then the coax section, I talk about ways that you can blast past project paralysis, as I say. So like, how do you stop procrastinating on an idea and just start ideating? Immediately see it through a new lens with the break the box prompt. So how do you kind of like get past some of the assumptions that you're making on a project, and then find stories like an editor with the CTR prompt. Those are different prompts or exercises that you can use to coax out ideas. And then I have communicate. So how do you figure out the appropriate balance between like a creative idea and like just going with what works? And then how do you create a visual metaphor? And then mixing different mediums and experiences. So there's those 3 sections, and each one has a prompt or an exercise that you can do at the end to actually start integrating this into your work.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really like about the book is how practical it is. It is very like concrete advice. It is just like, do this, do this, do this. you'll be good, kind of thing,
Mhm.
which is quite different to a lot of other books out there on creativity and such. And I think the other thing that I like about it is how short it is
Mhm.
relatively. Like again, compared to a lot of other books out there, there isn't a whole lot of filler in it. It's very much just like, here's the information you need.
Yeah,
Bam,
and you
we're
guys
done.
helped me with that. We could talk about that in the process, but the beta reading, you guys are especially like, "Nope, too slow, too slow, too slow." Just like delete, delete, delete.
But
And that's
but
what
I
I
mean,
wanted. I wanted it to be fast. Like, I want
well, yeah. So
for me to
that
be
was what
done
I
with
wanted to ask about. Like, how did you decide? Like, why do you want it to be fast rather than something that people would marinate in and has a feeling to it, and all these other things that books can be,
Yeah.
because there's lots of different kinds of books.
Yeah, which I love too, but, that's how I prefer to have information given to me. Like, just give me the stuff. And if I want a story or something, then I have to seek it out. Like, I want to, like, if I, sit down and I was reading The New Yorker yesterday, and I had the actual magazine, and I wanted to sit down and I wanted to read a story. It was about a woman and her, she had a baby and then she had a divorce, so it's just like walking you through this really interesting story. And I think there's a time and place for that. But in terms of my career in Dataviz, like, I kind of just want the stuff. And I don't want I think it's really hard to have a lot of things, talk a lot about stuff, um, without it coming across as meandering, unless you're a really good writer. And I wouldn't s I'm okay. I'm an okay writer, but I wouldn't say I'm like, that's not my profession or anything. So, I was afraid that if I wasn't direct and didn't lean into my, like, technical writing skills, then it was gonna end up being confusing.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I read the book. Opened it this morning. I think it took like an hour and a half to read
Yeah.
it cover to cover. Um, and that's like perfect for,
Yes. I know you can read it in
because
this sitting, right?
because I actually finished it. Because
Mhm.
honestly, I have a lot of books on design and data visualization and all these things, and maybe like 10 to 20% of them I've actually finished. The rest of them I get like 50%, three quarters through, and then put it down.
I know. That should have been the tagline. You will finish this book.
Yeah. And like Duncan said, like even with just the length, but it's not just the length, but the way that it's broken up in terms of the different sections, the way that you have like bullet point summaries at the end of every chapter. You have the prompts, like you said, the little exercises in between to break up the text. It makes it something that's like, you have to keep flipping almost. Like it makes you want to keep flipping the pages. So
Yeah, it definitely feels like you've built it. Like, the information architecture in the book is, it's a book to be used rather than a book to be enjoyed, almost. Which isn't to say that you won't enjoy it, but it's like that's not the purpose of it.
It feels like a workbook, something you can like pick up over and over, which I think we even talked about. You were like, this is what I want. Like, I want it to be a workbook and you can grab it, because it feels like I can just grab it and I'm like, oh, I'm stuck on an idea. Let me go to the chapter about codes, and there's some intro and some things that we can talk about the 4Cs, because I like that concept, but there's some intros about like creativity, but it quickly goes into like practical stuff you can do when you get stuck. And I think that is probably what is distinct from other books on Dataviz, which is more like general advice, or like education, or more like historical or more storytelling based.
Yeah, case studies or something.
Yeah, or like
case studies.
graphics that you look at, right? Somebody asked me like about the audiobook. They're like, "Oh, will you describe the graphics in the book?" And I was like, "Well, some of them, but it's not like a ton of Dataviz is in there, because I didn't want people to be like, oh, I'm going to pick this up and be inspired by Huh?
Is there any Dataviz?
There is like two, maybe three charts, but really I tried not to. I just added those just because I really felt like they illustrated the point I was making really well. Yeah, there's one, and then there's the one about the avocados in there too. Oh yeah, this one.
Yeah, for those not watching the videos, they're showing a isotype Dataviz. Okay, the Venn diagram doesn't count.
Yeah, I don't think that's more.
And then Ali is showing what is
that was a dumbbell chart. Yeah, about avocado prices. Yep. Yeah. So
I gotta say, when I was reading it, it actually, so I came across that isotype chart, the one where you were discussing how you made it for this client, and it was like they were on different, different
Mhm.
fields as far as like what you were aiming at. And I became like angry for you. I was like, this is so good. I was like, it's
know.
perfect for a t-shirt. It's really creative. Like it's interesting to
Mhm.
look at without knowing what it is. But it also shows exactly the pattern. Like,
I
so
know. I
that's a
know.
complete tangent side note. But I was just like, God, like Ali,
You have to write another book on how to convince your boss to act a client to actually
Yeah.
use the creative idea.
I would be rich if I could write a book that actually worked like that. How to always
well,
get your ideas accepted.
yeah, maybe that's a good segue to talk a little bit about like the financial stuff, because I'm just curious about that. I mean, I don't know,
Yeah.
how much you can share or is useful to share, but maybe you could talk just briefly about like the business side of it.
Yeah.
What was the negotiating with the publisher, or how this even works? Do you get a lump sum payment? Do you get an advance? Do you get a percentage of sales? And how is that all figured out?
And just to add to Will's question there, how much of it did you write before you started to look for a publisher as well?
Well, I guess I didn't write any of it until I started looking for a publisher, but you do have to write some for the proposal. So I guess I can start from the beginning. So you have an idea, right? And then you write a book proposal. So the sections I have in the book proposal is an overview, the audience. So like, who do you think is going to be reading this book? A little bit about you, your unique perspective, what your platform is, which I learned is very important to publishers.
Can you talk about that a
yeah.
little bit more?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that
Well, the
exactly?
thing is, nobody gets rich on books. Is like the top 0.01%, right, is probably getting rich on a book. And that's who the publishers really lean on to make their most money. So for everybody else, you are going to be the one that's really pushing your book and selling your book. So they want to know, do you have a lot of people listening to you? And I understand that. I do understand, especially now. I completely understand that. I understand it better because I can see how if I just published the book and I just sat back and being like, well, the publisher will handle it. I could see how easily the book would die because the publishers don't do anything. Not saying anything specific about my publisher, Data Literacy Press. They're amazing. But in general, across the board, don't expect your publisher is going to like be leading the charge and promoting this book. They just don't. So they lean on you to do it. So they want to know, how good are you going to be at selling this book? Are you committed to it? Who's already listening to you? And part of that is like also a validation of your ideas. Sometimes somebody has amazing ideas and they just come out of the woodwork, but a lot of times they are already talking about their good ideas and people are like, yes, that's a good idea. And they're following them, and they're showing that they're following them through newsletter subscribers or social media followers, whatever. So they want to know what your following is. And there are actually a couple publishers that told me no because my following wasn't big enough. So they're just like, just don't have a big following.
Where did they have numbers that they were expecting? Like, you need to meet 100,000 followers across platforms?
No, and the publishers aren't going to give you a number because it's all very like closed door. But I mean, I've listened to so many podcasts and read so many books about book publishing that I remember someone saying like, don't even submit a book proposal unless you have like 10,000 followers somewhere, 10,000 newsletter subscribers. I don't know if that number really means anything, but like that's just one number someone was willing to put out there. So that's what I remember. So I'm sure it's different for everybody. But yeah, they really care about your platform. So I would say if you have a dream of writing a book and going with a traditional publisher, work on getting that platform numbers up ASAP because it takes a long time. Like you don't get a gazillion in LinkedIn followers overnight. Like you really need to work on it. Yeah. And the following that I did have had taken 6 years to create. So I mean, I'm proud of it, but some people are like, no, too small.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably some people who are watching or listening to this are going to be thinking, okay, so a publisher doesn't market your book for you at all. What do they actually do?
I mean, from what, as far as I can tell, like I'm thinking of like the bigger publisher. So Day Literacy Press is a small publisher, so they took care of a lot of stuff for me. I can say maybe I can speak directly to my experience. They got my editors for me, so people reading the book and fixing errors and whatever. Got a typesetter for me. It typeset the book, which I think turned out amazing. I designed the cover. I think if you had a different publisher, they would help you. They would take some sort of ownership of the cover. I think some authors want to be more involved than others, but like they will take responsibility for the cover. And just put all the information up on Amazon, Ingram Spark. That's the drop shipper that ships out to like Barnes and Noble and independent bookshops and any other ones.
So the distribution, basically.
Yeah, distribution. Yeah. They figure out the distribution for you, which that's worth something. But I guess going back to what Will you specifically asked was like the money part. Or actually, maybe I should close the loop on the proposal just in case anybody really was interested in that. So let's see, my platform, book promotion, like how I plan to use this book and how I plan to promote it. Books that I feel like were similar to the book I want to write, and how I think the book will be similar and how I think it'll be different. Publishing details like, I imagine this book will be like 6x9, about 200 pages with color graphics, those kinds of details. How the artwork is going to come to fruition. Am I going to do the artwork? Am I going to commission someone to do it? Table of contents for the book, and then chapter samples. So typically they want to see maybe 2 to 3 chapters. I think I included 4. Yeah, 4. So just even if you don't want to go with a typical publisher, you can see like that's a lot of information. So think a lot of things I didn't even think through, like what this book would actually look like in terms of like size and how big it was. It's kind of like the the cart before the horse kind of a thing. It's like, well, I got to write it first to know some of this stuff. So a lot of it is just a stab in the dark. Like I kind of imagine it would look like this. And what I did was I pulled a lot of books off my shelf. Like, I really like the feel of this one. I like the size of this one. This one was kind of too big for me to hold and it was hard to read. I didn't like how the margins were like this. So I would say like start collecting books that you really enjoyed reading, and that can be a good starting point for how you want your book to look. So proposal, and then send it to publishers. And let's see. Well, you asked like how the payment structures are. So it varies in terms of how much you get for royalties. So you may or may not get an advance, and the advance is like an advance on your royalties. So if you get, let's say, $1,000 in an advance, then you would have to earn out your royalties before you start getting any more royalties from the book. And considering, I think
so like the first $1,000 you earn in royalties, you don't get that. That goes to the publisher.
Yeah, so earn out the advance. And a lot of books don't sell more than like 200 or 300 copies. Like if you sell like 1,000 copies, it's like, okay, that was solid. So you can see how most people don't earn out their advances. And it's really just like those top echelon of books that are making money for the publishers. And typically you get so the offers I got, it was like between 10 and 15% of the profits of the book. So this is minus the cost of the paper of the book, the printing costs. So whatever is left of the profit, you get like 10 to 15% of the profit on that. And it also kind of varies from different formats. So you have the paperback, and if you do a hardback, ebook, and audiobook. Yep. I noticed the percentages changed for some people, and some contracts, we're talking about the taking a percentage of like courses that you do associated with the book. So that's a thing with the publisher. You have to think about like, how flexible do you want to be able to be with your intellectual property? Like, do you want to do workshops?
No.
Yeah. That's a big thing that I didn't even think about, is like how much a publisher would want to take of your of your intellectual property and like anything you take from the book. And your hands are really tied for like if you want to give a chapter away for free, let's say for marketing, or you want to give a talk about it and you want to give like a free resource to people, like you kind of have to go through your publisher in some instances, go through your publisher and get approval. I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like I want to be able to do what I want to do with the book. So try to find a publisher where that stuff aligns. And I wrote down like some things that I was looking for as I was trying to decide which publisher to go with. So like percentage of royalties in advance, like that was kind of lower on the list because I wasn't under any delusion I was going to make like a lot of money with this. It was more to get the idea out there and hopefully like spawn more projects for myself or like workshops, all that kind of thing. So it was more like a business card kind of a thing. How much of your intellectual property do you get to keep and what can you do with it in the future? How they'll help you. Flexibility in the art direction. Like some publishers are just like, we are taking this thing and you kind of get no say in the typesetting. Like we are going to do the cover for you and like you just be quiet. And then how much you trust your editor too. Like do they have your back and fighting for you and making sure you get your vision done? So I was just thinking about what things were important to me, and definitely like the trust and the flexibility in the art direction were the highest thing in the IP. Those were like the top things for me. So that's how I finally came to Data Literacy Press for my publisher. But yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that like you don't get into writing books for money, obviously, but it can, especially like if you are working in this field, it's a technical book, you have a whole business built around this, then yeah, it's a huge form of, showing your expertise and
proof.
Exactly. Proof. I think we've talked about that before on shows, that a lot of times people just want to see proof, like you are an expert in this thing. And so it's, saying I wrote a whole book is a pretty big like tick on your resume.
Yeah. And I think that's why people like going with the traditional publishers, because it lends even more to that, because anybody can self-publish. But if it's like a publisher actually believed in me to do this and, put it out, invested in me to put this out in the world, and that means something. But you also have to do the pros and cons of what you're giving up in order to get that.
Definitely.
It feels in many ways similar to doing a project for like a lower budget where it's a big investment up front. You don't get a lot of like financial rewards out of it, but if you do it right, you could potentially get things like, get new clients with it, or in your case, like it's a marketing tool on top of it's actually useful. It's a result of all the work that you've been doing for 10 years, which some projects are. And then on top of that, you can get results like that can allow you to reach an audience that you may have not reached before. Right. But it's not about direct reward connected to the book, or like a free project would be like you don't get any money for that, but it can lead to more later down the road.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people maybe feel bad about how their book experience turned out, is because they were thinking maybe they were going to make a lot of money with the book somehow. But I just, from my research, I just don't see that happens with most people. I think
it's the same with courses. Like, I mean, no money with the domestic course. Not a dime. Because it's like you would
take so long.
It would. I mean, also to be fair,
so
not
people
marketing. You have to market, but I think a part of it is because you do have it's a quantity number. Like it's priced low, just like your book. It's accessible, so you would have to hit a really large number of people buying that thing to make some kind of money on that 10%. Right,
and you're seeing a lot of Dataviz books like $50 now, and I think that's why, like, trying to make just like a little bit of money out of it. And that was another thing with my publisher. I knew Data Literacy Press they were going to take my my say or my opinion on how much I thought the book could be, and I was like, I want it to be basically as cheap as possible without it making it look like it was like a cheapo book, because I want people to be able to buy it, and it's hard to afford a $50 book.
I think we did a lot of talking about some of the challenges, the difficulties of the book, but to go in the opposite direction, I'm very curious to know, like, what did you learn out of this process? Like, what was the most, I think, because when I think about writing a book, it's like collecting all this information, but obviously you have to learn new things. You have to do so much research for this. And we always talk about how teaching or writing blog posts or these types of educational things is like the best way to learn yourself and to focus your own thoughts and really collect your learnings. So like, how was that experience? What did you learn? Was it helpful for in that regard?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that it really helped me crystallize my thoughts and being able to talk about these things so easily. Someone asks a question, I can immediately pull like an interview that I've done and like a specific thing to do. I did a talk a couple weeks ago, I guess it was, and during the Q&A, people would ask me a question, and I'd be like, bing bang boom, just like sounding so knowledgeable on it, just because I had written an entire chapter on it and I had thought about it so much already and had organized my thoughts already. I could immediately answer it. And I'm sure that sounds impressive if you were just listening to it, but it's like, well, if you think about something so long and think about it from all different angles, that your thinking just becomes so crystallized on the topic. And I also learned that it's really invaluable to have people read your work and you get feedback on it. And it's really hard to put your stuff out there and be like, like, here's my ugly baby, like, read it. Do you like it? Like, doing the beta reading was really hard because I asked for honest feedback and people gave me honest feedback, but there are some things I had to cut that I really liked, and things that wasn't landing or felt confusing or slow to some people. And it's like, well, if like 3 people out of 10 are giving you that feedback, it's like, well, that's a significant percentage. There 3 out of 10 people like just don't get this at all. Like, maybe you should listen to it. If it's like 1 out of 10, it's like, maybe it was just this one person, but you hear the same thing like 3 times, like, yeah, you're probably right. And I could see how much better the book got based on just like 10 people reading it from top to bottom, people that I trusted and giving me feedback on it. So I think I would do that more and more often if I wrote a second book, because I could just see how useful it was.
And how did, I guess, like going through this whole process compare with your expectations beforehand? What was harder and what was easier?
Doing the first draft was by far the hardest part. And I think if I did it next time, I would just be like, stop being precious about it. Just like get it down. Because I just edit it to death. Like the introduction and the first section introduction about caring, and even really the whole carrot section was just so hard to write. Maybe because it was a little bit more like squishy, where I had to kind of explain concepts a little bit that were, it was a little bit less cut and dry than just like, hey, here's a chart and here's how somebody approached it. That was a really difficult section. It took me a long time, but I think I would just try to get the first draft done more quickly, because editing is just going to take a long time anyway, and you're just going to do pass after pass after pass. But you need something to edit, you got to like actually see something, and you have to have something to show other people. And you can't do that until you have a first draft done. So that was really painful getting the first draft done. And I think I would be less precious about it. And one thing that really did help was, so I did the first draft and I sent it to my publisher, and then I didn't think about the book for about 6 weeks. Just like getting that draft out was like almost killed me. I was like waking up at like 6 a.m. and, working for an hour and a half before my kids got up, like every morning, just so I would like, actually do it. Cause during the day, your work stuff just gets away from you. So I was just like really burnt out once I finally got the draft done. So I didn't look at it for 6 weeks. And then I went to the library and got it printed out for me on like 4 pages on 1 page, printed. So like it wouldn't cost me an arm and a leg to get it printed. So it cost me like $10 to get it printed to the library like that. And then I took a red pen and I just read everything and edited that way. So like changing the medium really helped. Like, sitting at the computer, like, my back already hurts thinking about me having to edit this thing, all these pages. So getting it into a different format really helped the editing process.
And why did you choose to, well, I mean, did you work with an external editor, or were you kind of editing yourself, or how did that work?
Yeah, not like so there's multiple types of editors. I have come to discover. So like someone who's like more of a line editor kind of person, one more like a developmental editor, like someone who can help you arrange things and like, oh, you need to talk about the story more. I might hire someone. I probably would have hired someone like that if I were to do it again. I didn't have someone like that this time. I was doing that myself. But it probably would have been good to have expert look at that kind of a thing. The editor that I worked with just came in at the end and just made sure like everything was
Like a sub editor.
yeah, made sense, and like the
Mm.
the formatting was right, punctuation is all that. I had two of them. One of them that was more of just a very, very basic copy editor, but then Emily Barone from Nightingale, she's the editor at Nightingale. She also does freelance editing. She's amazing if anybody needs freelance editing. She actually read the book in one day because I was kind of in a rush. And she gave me amazing edits. And she was even further, she was more than just a copy editor. She gave me like, this doesn't quite make sense, or I would use this word choice. She was much deeper than that. So I probably would have used her more throughout the process, maybe to help me develop my ideas a little more, because she's a very clear thinker.
So hang on. So getting the first draft out was harder than you expected, but what was easier than you expected in the process?
Oh, the graphics, I think. Doing the graphics. So like where was this in the process? Once I sent it to the copy editor and I was waiting like a week or two to get it back, I started creating the graphics, and I was like, okay, here we go. Like, I want to make sure these are good and stuff. But I had already kind of developed a style that I wanted to use from my outlier talk. It was kind of like that, almost like watercolory type brush that I was using in Procreate, kind of like a cartoony kind of person, doing things. So I knew what style I wanted, and I just kind of read the book and made a list of places where I was like, okay, this would be a great place for kind of like a visual, what do you call it, like diagrammy, or just like conceptual visual. And I just like churned them out in Procreate. I was just like drawing and drawing. I probably finished them in a day, exported them, dropped them in. I was like, wow. Okay, I'm done with the art.
I feel like that's like the benefits of having your own style honed down. Especially if you put like, you were like, I know exactly what brush I like to use. That makes everything so much easier. You just have to think about the concept and not anything else.
Right. Yeah,
there's
you're
no
right.
R&D. It's all delivery.
And part of that came from aerating my ideas, right? Like I had to actually create something for the Outlier conference. And so like trying a bunch of different things. And then when I did that talk, a lot of people were like, oh, I like that style. And it's like, oh yeah, I kind of do too. So I knew that it resonated with people and that I liked it. And it was actually kind of easy to create. That's one of the things. It's like lean into your weaknesses, right? So it was a lot easier than I thought it would be.
And how close is the final book to your original idea of what it was going to be?
When I pulled out the proposal, I actually read through the old introduction and some of the old chapters that I had, and what I ended up was so much better. And I think part of that was because going through the process, I just continued to get like more and more clear on what I was trying to say and what I wanted people to actually do with it, and try to make it like as simple as possible, rather than like getting all caught up in like weeds and stories and this, that, and the other. Just being like super clear. Okay, this chapter is about this thing, and this is what I want the person to be able to do. The book ended up very, very, what's the word? Like direct, maybe is the word I'm looking for. So, reading through the stuff I had written in the proposal, it felt a little bit more like that typical book where maybe you could get a little bit lost in what the person is saying and like stories and all that. So yeah, I think it ended up a lot better than I started out.
But I mean, rather than compared to what you started out, I guess I was asking more about like your original picture of what it was going to be in your head.
Yeah. Yeah,
I guess
way
it's
better.
difficult to sort of think back.
Yeah, because I guess
what that is, because that picture has been replaced by what it actually is.
Over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did think it was going to be like when I thought that I was just going to self-publish something. I think I went much, much deeper than I initially expected, like gathering a lot of interviews, reading a lot of research papers. And like when you read a research paper, more times than not, like you're not going to use what you learned in it, because a lot of them don't really like end up having some big revelation. It's like, this needs to be studied more, which is fine, but it's like, well, I'm not going to use that in the book. So I actually had to read a lot more than I actually ended up using. But I think that helped me incorporating research and my personal experiences and interviews, having those things, I think really made the final book, like really rich.
Did you have to make additional interviews? Because I know, for context, so for those of you who haven't read the book, it is, I think, based partly on like people's experience and like feedback to you, and then you kind of condense that into practical advices. It's not just like you giving your opinion on like how things should be done, which I think is so great about it, because there's so many ideas there. But did you have to interview more people for the book, or did you have enough already from like your podcast and your experiences to work from there?
I think so I did a creativity mini series, and I think this was when I was I think that was before I did the proposal or like after the proposal, because it took a few months before, from submitting the proposal to like getting offers. That takes months. So I was doing these interviews during that time. So I think I had maybe 6 interviews that were specific on creativity. And then even as I was writing it, I was still running the podcast. So I think I was kind of occasionally, like if I was wrestling with something in the book, I might ask someone that I was interviewing that month about that thing so I could bring it in. I don't remember a specific instance like, oh, I grabbed that from an interview afterwards. But since it's just something that I was continually doing, I think I did occasionally have a pointed question. Like, I'm actually wrestling with this right now. Can you tell me more about this?
And how valuable do you think it was to do that sort of like working in public almost? You had your sort of interview series, you were publishing that as you went. I think you were fairly open with people that you were working on this book. It wasn't like a secret thing. So anyone who was joining the dots could see that this was probably stuff that was going to go into the book. How did you feel about that at the time? Did it feel like you were sort of like giving away your secrets too early, or?
Well, no, because I know from experience that what people like about my style is that like I can take a lot of information and things and like summarize it very succinctly at the end. So like I do that on a mini level in like one podcast. But I knew that people would like that I could take all the podcast episodes that I've listened to and then like all my experiences and put them in the book. So I wasn't worried about like revealing secrets too soon or anything. And I think people like being part of the process and just being part of the journey, seeing how I'm collecting information and how I'm going to put it together.
Synthesize it. And
to synthesize it. Yeah, I think people like being part of the journey. And along the way, people would give me feedback like, oh, I really like this part, or I got a lot of use out of this part. And that helped me hone what I was going to talk about too. So I think it's a win-win.
And how did the Elevate community how did that influence or feed into the book?
I think the feedback stuff too. So I think some of the beta readers were from the Elevate group, and every week we have a question, like a weekly question that I post to the group, like just talking about like, hey, what do you think about this? Have you ever had this kind of experience? And a lot of times I was pulling things from the book that I needed to kind of expand on. So it was just like, what,
Nice.
like one time I asked a question, like, what do you feel like creativity would do for you? And a lot of people gave me great answers. Like it would help me, give me more confidence to find a good idea during a project, or it would help me feel more fulfilled in my work. So that really helped give me like adjectives and different people's experiences that I could bring into the introduction, for example. So just hearing a lot of people's experiences really helped shape the book.
Maybe in the last 10 minutes, do we want to do a quick roundtable of like our favorite little takeaway or tidbit from the book? Ending with Ali, perhaps?
Or we can do a whole other podcast about it. Like we can maybe because I feel like we had this title of how to find creative Dataviz, but it's more about how to write a Dataviz book. So maybe
we'll have to change the title.
We keep that confined here, but let's do it because that way people can get excited about the book.
Yeah, it can be a teaser. because I have many things that I can choose. But
tell us about some of them, Will.
I'm also curious. We'll end with Allie because I want to know what Allie's favorite takeaway or
Mhm.
something your favorite little thing you could take away from the book is. But
Yeah.
I think something that really resonated with me was you had a little section talking about things that can block creativity or get in the way of creativity.
Mhm.
And stress is like a huge one, right? Just how you're
Yeah.
feeling in your personal life or how your body is feeling. And that is something that I've struggled with a lot because, Andy Kirk had a quote in there about like how even something seemingly insignificant and kind of silly, like, oh, I know there's a radiator in my basement that could leak and, cause water damage or whatever, which is like this hypothetical and all this kind of thing that you'd say, like, why am I worried about that? But something that's simple as that can just like cause enough background distraction and stress that it really makes it hard. It weighs on you. And I've felt that a lot. Like there have been periods where, I have months or like 6 months where I feel like I'm just constantly stressed and anxious about whatever is happening in my life. And it really prevents me from being creative. And some of the times that I've been the most creative in my life is when I like went on vacation for a couple weeks and completely unplugged and like forgot about all my worries at home and my work and everything. And all of a sudden, like it just, things blossomed in my mind. So I don't know what you do about that exactly. Obviously, you can, managing stress and anxiety in your life is a whole other podcast, but don't be too hard on yourself, I guess.
Yeah, I think just knowing that that's a thing. Like, hey, it's harder for me to perform on this project right now because like I'm thinking about this stuff, and I think giving yourself grace that this is just a part of the process.
And being able to like recognize when it's happening as well. I think a lot of people are just so stressed that they can't see that they are stressed. They're just sort of reacting to things. So being able to step back and recognize that is really helpful. How about you, Gabby?
My favorite part is the idea of the 4C for creativity, almost like the definition aspect, because I feel there's a bit of a pressure for creatives, so Dataviz people to do like big creative project. And I mean, there's the stuff that we get excited. We want to do pottery, we want to do like art, but like it feels sometimes when you have a brief with a client that your like creativity is restrained and like you're not being creative because it needs to be corporate, it needs to fit into this weird format for the web. And I think sometimes we forget that that's creative too. And so I love how you have those 4 C's. So the 4 C's, can I tell what the 4 C's are? I'm allowed to like display.
Oh yeah, please. Yeah. I mean, it's someone else's research. So,
that's true. So, but I love how you put it together. It's like the mini C, which is like personally meaningful, like the small stuff. There's like little C, which is like the everyday hobby things. The 4 C, the professional creativity, and then the big C, which is like genius, like Picasso type. But what I like about it is when you give that range, you realize that you can do a lot of like small, like the mini C or the little C every day, like acts of creativity without having a big, giant genius look at this core art piece. And also those acts of creativity in the daily life can really inform the big genius one. I feel like people just forget about that. And also because creative fields in general have that weird habit of singling out geniuses, being like, oh, this person is a genius in design, and whatever they do later down is always genius, even if sometimes there's like, you could rethink that. It's just weird to like isolate people and have those like, even in art in general, like Van Gogh and Picasso, I'm like, there's hundreds of artists and some of them probably were as good. They just maybe didn't market as much or were not as famous, they didn't have the network to become famous. Of course there's like recognized art, but even when you look at art from Michelangelo, like he didn't paint most of it. He had people helping him, and we don't know their names. So I just think it's nice that you put that out from the get-go. It's at the beginning of the book, and to me, it speaks a lot to the work I do today because I do less cool creative campaigns and more like impactful work that's a bit more corporate, but has a bigger impact at a larger scale. And I found that to remind ourselves that you can do little acts of creativity in your everyday life, and that matters too. I don't know, that felt good. I was like, I feel less guilty about not doing this like beautiful, cool project where I get a bunch of praise, even though I'm not convinced that this is actually working. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. That was research by Kaufman and Bagetto. And you're right. Like just knowing that these like having a language for these 4 types of creative acts, it makes you feel like, oh, the bar is not that high to be creative. Like just learn a little something new today. And hey, you were creative.
Duncan, when was your favorite part?
My turn. I really liked the section on thinking like an editor.
Mm-hmm.
And like figuring out ways to make what you are creating meaningful to other people. I feel like that is very much the secret sauce in a lot of the very, very best information design work that doesn't get talked about nearly enough.
Yeah.
Like this idea of just, it's such a simple principle, like thinking what is actually going to be useful to this audience, like what is going to resonate with them. But so often you just see people describing a bunch of data without going the next step and just being like, and here's what it means for you. So having that highlighted so prominently in the book, I think was really, really helpful, especially the CTR prompt that you came up with it. I can't remember what it is. It's something resolution, right?
Yeah. So you start with your observation and then think about the conflict that is in that, like, why does this matter? Who's affected by it? The timeliness, that's the T. Why does this matter now? And then the resolution, like what could people do, or where can people go to find more information?
Yeah,
and
the call to action.
Yeah, that's actually my favorite chapter too, but kind of for a different reason, because a lot of data people feel like creativity equals artistry, and that if I am not artistic, I am therefore not creative. But there is creativity and artistry, obviously, but there's also like that problem solving aspect of creativity. And I think the CTR prompt shows that really well, because I have that example of just a very basic line chart with the avocados. And then we run through the CTR prompt in the book and then have a slightly different chart. And you can see that the 2 charts, they're not winning like information is beautiful awards. Like it's not blowing anybody's socks off. But you run through this prompt and you kind of can shift your angle on the data in a slightly different way. And it creates a chart that people actually want to use. Like the information is useful now to you. And maybe you use a slightly different chart type to be able to show this slightly more interesting information. And that's creative. Boom. You didn't have to like create amazing spread in Scientific American, or you don't have to have skills like that. You can still be creative with like very, very simple things. So I feel like that chapter in particular can like turn a data person's mind around and thinking like, oh, I'm actually kind of creative.
I think that's a really, really lovely note to end on. So how about we wrap it up there? Just before we go, how do people get this book that we have spent an hour talking about?
Yes, go to chartsparkbook.com, and there's links to buy it everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, which does the local bookshop thing. And then you can also order the PDF on dataliteracy.com. And it's available paperback and ebook and audiobook now. So you can listen to it if you want to.
When is the super fancy hardback edition coming out?
No hardback.
Next book.
Yes, next book.
Next book. Wonderful. All right. Ali, do you want to do the outro?
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming. And thank you guys for your questions about the book. It was really nice to talk about the process and reminisce a little bit about it. And thanks for joining us today. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can join our Elevate Dataviz learning community at elevatedataviz.com. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.